Hi, Prabhuda. Good to see you.
Hi, good, good. I think you have started recording. Sunita, I could see she's there also. Hey, Sunita, how are you?
All good.
Hey, good, good, good. I think the event started, right? Okay.
Yeah, we're just starting.
Hello everyone. So shall we start in some time?
I think we can start.
We can give it a minute. Yeah, we can give it a minute.
Okay, sure, sure.
People are joining. Numbers are increasing.
Yeah, I think we are hitting 30 participants. So maybe we can start.
Sure.
Thank you. So again, a very good evening, everyone. On behalf of WRI-India, AEEE EcoCollab and Mahindra Life Spaces, it's my pleasure to welcome you all who have joined us online today. So before we begin, just a few housekeeping rules. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. So please make sure that, while you join in, please select the join with computer audio and please rejoin if you're still unable to hear us. And also use the Q&A box in the chat section to ask any questions if you might have. Also, please note that today's event is being recorded and will also be made available to you online. You can please write to us on the mentioned 2 email IDs below. Yes, so today, we begin with the second session of our learning series, One Brick at a Time, called the Decarbonizing the Building and Construction Sector through Science-Based Targets, which is also part of our business charter, which was launched on 10th February last year. And this was also endorsed by Mr. Anand Mahindra. In the next slide, we will see all the signatories who have signed up for the charter. We are glad to inform that we have 20 signatories now on board with us who have committed to adopting ambitious net zero target in their business strategies. We are also excited to welcome the newly joined signatories who have joined the board. I would like to mention their names, which is like Griha, Green Rating for Integrated Habitat Assessment Council, GoHemp Adventures Private Limited based at Uttarakhand, Aeon Integrated Building Design Consultants LLP, and Smarter Dharma. We really look forward to working with all of you. So with this, we'll now commence the second session. I'm happy to introduce to you all the speakers of today's session. We have with us Mr. Prabodha Acharya, Dr. Sunita Purushottamam, and Mr. Subrato Chakraborty. Before we begin, I'll just give a brief introduction about our esteemed speakers. Mr. Acharya is the Chief Sustainability Officer for JSW Group and drives the sustainability strategy for the JSW Group of companies, steel, energy, cement, paints, infrastructure. Being an MTech in environmental engineering, he has worked for more than 3 decades in the field of corporate environment management, emissions reduction, climate change, corporate strategy on sustainability, and policy development across various sectors and geographies. We warmly welcome you again, Mr. Acharya. The second speaker for today's session is Dr. Sunita Purushottamam, who is the head of sustainability at Mahindra Lifespaces Limited. With an experience of over 2 decades in sustainability strategy and environmental consultancy space, she is also a member of the Mahindra & Mahindra CSR and sustainability initiatives. Dr. Sunita is also an active working group member of the digitization workstream for built environment and built system of the World Business Council of Sustainable Development. And she's also a fellow of the Royal Met Society based at London. Welcome, Dr. Sunita. Mr. Subrata Chakraborty is a senior manager with the climate program at WRI-India. Here, he is involved in various research work based on the thematic areas of informing the next round of NDCs, long-term strategies, and electric mobility. Subrata has led also GHG abatement in India's leading infrastructure and finance conglomerates. He has also worked as a GHG auditor with one of the UNFCCC accredited organizations, where he designed and led third-party verification on the thematic area of RE, waste handling and disposal under many voluntary and compliance market-based mechanisms. Welcome again, Mr. Subrata. I would like to thank all our speakers for humbly accepting our invitation and joining us today despite your busy schedules. Lastly, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Faiza Solanki. I work as an architect and I am an urban planner by training. I work in WRI-India for past 3 years as a senior program associate, and my portfolio here focuses on thematic areas of inclusive climate action planning, climate finance, and corporate action for decarbonization. I would also like to take the opportunity to welcome and thank my fellow colleagues, Ms. Priyal Shah and Dr. Niyati, who have been a great help in organizing this session. Priyal and Niyati are senior program associates at WRI-India and work towards mainstreaming just transition and climate resilience aspects for the MSMEs in our work. So let us now briefly look at today's session. In this session, we will hear from our speakers on what are SBTs and what it means to the building and construction companies. We'll also see more on the approach, methods, and steps for setting the science-based targets. We will also hear from our expert speakers who will present the business case and benefits for companies that adopt the science-based targets on their daily life and the daily work scopes that they are dealing with. So with this, I would like to kindly request Mr. Subrata to take the session forward with his presentation on the approach for setting science-based target for the building and construction companies. Over to you, Mr. Subrata. Thank you.
Thank you, Faiza. First of all, warm welcome to all the listeners. Well, warm welcome to the eminent speakers. What I plan to do is in next 10 to 15 minutes, I'd like to go through the overview and approach for the science-based targets, why it is necessary, what are the steps that are needed for setting the science-based target, what are the few things that one need to consider in order to set a science-based targets, and then we will hear from our eminent speakers on their journey of setting ambitious climate actions. So I think it's sort of an undeniable fact that climate has in fact changed, and we have been seeing headlines related to recent extreme weathers, and it sort of appears to come out of a science fiction book. Even the richest countries in the world cannot really control the widespread fires, a deadly, flooding in Germany and Belgium in July 2021 completely washed away buildings and cars and ended up killing more than 1,000 people. Just before COP27, 1/3 of the Pakistan was underwater, killed more than 1,700 people, devoured 1.7 million homes, and impacted more than 33 million people. And the post-disaster need assessment report estimates a total damage that exceeds 14.9 billion US dollar and a total economic loss that reached around 15.2 billion US dollar. And the rehabilitation and the reconstruction cost is estimated to be 16.3 billion US dollar if Pakistan need to, rebuild in a very resilient way. So the recent IPCC reports make it abundantly clear that these weather events will happen and they will happen more frequently. And only with, ambitious emission cuts can the world keep global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees C. We need to make rapid transformative changes, and we will have to redefine the way in which we produce energy, we make or consume goods and services, we manage our land, and we cannot just rely on government to take ambitious actions. The role of non-state actors such as businesses and corporations are crucial in this important decade of climate action. And this is where we see the role of science-based targets. So what are science-based targets? The greenhouse gas emission reduction targets are called science-based if they are in line with what the latest climate science deems necessary to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement, that is limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees C. So science-based targets basically provide a clearly defined pathways for companies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, helping prevent the worst impact of the climate change and future-proof the business growth. Now, why we need to take action? Well, globally, buildings account for 37% of greenhouse gas emissions. If we put it, and if we look at it from the Indian perspective, the third biennial update report says that the buildings account for roughly around 25% of India's total carbon emission. Further, the urban floor space share is expected to reach somewhere close to 60% by 2040, and the share of fuel use is expected to rise by 50% by 2040. Now, consequently, the carbon emissions will rise dramatically if we do not consider any decarbonization efforts in this sector. And this will have a multiplier effect, and future-proofing the business will be costly and resource-intensive affair. Now, science-based targets make business sense as well. And we have the distinguished speakers here with us today who will speak on the same in a greater detail. If we look into the current status of science-based targets in India, as on 19th Feb 2023, there are 118 companies in India who have committed to science-based targets, out of which 45 companies have approved science-based targets. And if we narrow it down to the real estates, there are 5 companies that have committed to science-based targets, out of which 3 have their science-based targets approved, and all 3 companies belong to the Mahindra Group. It is also very encouraging to see that small and medium enterprises are considering science-based targets. 16 companies in this category have approved science-based targets so far, and we have seen that there is one company who have also committed to net zero science-based targets. If you see the graph on the left of this current slide, you can easily make out that the automobiles, construction and engineering, and the software sector are leading the adoption of science-based targets. But much more is needed to be done, and the complete industry need to really, set science-based target, because the time for low-hanging fruit has gone. Now, let us see very quickly what are what are the steps that are needed for science-based targets. It's basically a 5-step process, as you can see in the slide. As a first step, the companies need to register online and submit a letter of commitment to set science-based targets. The second step is to basically develop the targets in line with the science-based target criteria, and company have 24 months to develop this target and submit it for validation. Once the target has been set, the companies present this target to Science-Based Target Initiative for official validation. They need to fill out the target validation form, and this target validation form, along with the supportive documents, will be assessed by the technical expert group in the science-based targets. Once it has been approved by the Science-Based Target Initiative, companies need to announce this target and inform their stakeholders, and they also need to disclose the progress towards their targets. So like I mentioned, it is crucial to note here that the companies have 24 months from the date of commitment to complete and develop their science-based target and submit it for the validation to Science-Based Target Initiative. All right, so when we say committing to science-based target, what it actually means is that company need to register online, and there are different commitment letters that the company can choose. The commitment letter need to be sent to the email address that you see in the slide. There is a small due diligence process. After passing that process, the company will be recognized as committed on the Science-Based Target webpage and Science-Based Target Partners webpage, Women Business. Companies who are participant of UN Global Compact will also be recognized on the UNGC website. There is a separate streamlined route available for small and medium enterprises, and Science-Based Target have defined what it means by small and medium enterprise. We'll come back to that in a bit. Companies can submit the standard commitment letter that is available in the Science-Based Target website. However, Science-Based Target Initiative encourages company to commit to net zero and automatically join the business ambition for 1.5 degrees C and the Race to Zero campaigns. Further, I just wanted to mention very briefly that reaching the status of science-based net zero targets implies 2 conditions. One is achieving a scale of value chain emission reduction consistent with the pathways that limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees C with no or very low overshoot. And the second is to basically neutralize the impact of any source of residual emissions by permanently removing an equivalent volume of atmospheric CO2. The next immediate step is the modeling of the target, which basically comprises of 4 steps. One is obviously determining the base year emissions. The second is selecting the ambition of your target. The third one is identifying the suitable target setting method. And the fourth one is modeling the target. Now, in preparation to set a science-based target, it is very important for companies to bear in mind that the greenhouse gas inventory need to consider all 7 major greenhouse gas emissions in line with the GHG protocol, corporate accounting and reporting standards, scope 2 guidance, and scope 3 accounting and reporting standards. According to Science-Based Target Initiative, all companies must complete at least a scope 3 screening for all relevant categories. And if the scope 3 emissions comes out to be over 40% of total greenhouse gas emission of a particular company, then that company needs to also consider target for reducing scope 3 emissions as per Science-Based Target Initiative guidelines. All right, let's quickly take a look on the elements of the methods. In general, you see there are 3 main components for science-based target. One is the carbon budget, and it's basically a finite amount of carbon that can be emitted into the atmosphere before warming will exceed a specific temperature threshold. The most commonly used emission budget is the transient climate response to emissions, also called a TCRE, which basically estimates the instantaneous global temperature response to the cumulative emissions. Now, the Science-Based Target Initiative methods are relevant to all warming gases that are included in the Kyoto Protocol, and temperature goals have been defined based on the Paris Agreement, which specifies warming in 2100, that is the end of the century. And SBTi uses 50 percentile TCRE for 1.5 degrees C pathway, which evaluates to 990 gigatons of CO2e, which is roughly around 670 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So this is basically your carbon budget. The emission scenario represents a way to distribute the available carbon budget over time. The allocation approach, as you can see in the slide, refers to the way the carbon budget, underlying a given emission scenario is allocated among companies with the same level of disaggregation, that is in a region or in a sector or globally. There are two allocation methods that are approved by science-based targets. One is convergence and the another is contraction. In convergence, it is assumed that all companies within a given sector reduce their emission intensity to a common value by a given year as dictated by the global temperate pathway. In contraction, all companies reduce their absolute emissions or economic emission intensity at the same rate, irrespective of the initial emission performance. Now, one thing, I would like to clarify here, irrespective of what method a company chooses, these are all science-based targets, which means that the level of ambition remains the same, whether you consider the convergence or you consider the contraction method. All right, let us very quickly see. So this slide basically shows the different kind of methods based on the approaches that we discussed just now. Absolute contraction, it's a method for setting a science-based absolute targets. And through this approach, all companies reduce absolute emissions at the same rate, irrespective of their initial emission performance. Now, as per the guidelines of Science-Based Target Initiative, companies choosing absolute contraction will have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to the tune of 4.2% annually in line with 1.5 degrees C and 2.5% annual linear reduction rate is applicable for Scope 3 reduction targets. The sectoral decarbonization approach is a method for setting physical intensity targets that uses the convergence of emission intensity. So an intensity target is basically defined by a reduction of emissions relative to a specific business metric, right? It could be tons of, for example, it could be tons of CO2 per tons of product that is being produced by the company. The SDA method basically assumes a global convergence of the key sector emissions intensity by 2050, which means that as an example, the emission intensity of steel production, for example, in China or the US or Brazil is assumed to reach the same level by 2050, regardless of its current diversity. The science-based, the sectoral decarbonization approach uses the scenarios from International Energy Agency report called as Energy Technology Perspective, which comprises emissions and activity projections used to compute the sectoral pathways that is aligned with limiting the global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade as well as 1.5 degrees centigrade. But starting on, I think, 15th July 2022, if I'm not wrong, only 1.5 degrees C pathways are eligible. So for Scope 1 and 2, SBTi recommends developing emission reduction targets in line with 1.5 degrees C pathway. But for Scope 3, SBTi is still accepting targets that are aligned with well below 2 degrees C pathway. But it's a recommendation from Science-Based Target Initiative that the companies should pursue higher ambition. The third one is, what we call it as GEVA, greenhouse gas emissions per value added. It's a method for setting economic intensity target using the contraction of economic intensity. So targets set using JEVA method are formulated by an intensity reduction of tons of CO2 per dollar of value added. Under the JEVA method, companies are required to reduce reduce their emissions by 7% per year. So 7% year-on-year reduction rate is based on the absolute emission reduction of about 75% by 2050 from 2010 level. The last method is basically the suppliers or the customer engagement targets, which may be valuable if a company has yet to identify the levers for more specific reduction opportunities amongst its value chain partners. So engagement targets may be set around any relevant upstream or downstream scope 3 categories, wherein the engagement efforts could lead to reduction in the emissions. Now, it is basically crucial to submit the relevant target submission form once the target is set in accordance with the company type and the target type. And the company can book the validation through an online validation booking system that is available in Science Based Target Initiative website. SBTi offers a range of costed target validation services. What you see in the slide is non-exhaustive, non-exhaustive in nature. So for a near-term, science-based target validation, including a second submission for validation, a company need to pay a price of $9,500. So similarly, they have categorized it for different type of validation services, as you can see in the slide. In the next slide, basically, there are certain tips that the Science-Based Target Initiative, expects that the company should follow. When we provide Science-Based Target Initiative expects companies to only provide facts. Please do not provide them with your marketing content, such as, company overview from the websites or homepage. This won't give them the information they need and will unnecessarily delay the process, and they will reach out to you for further clarifications. In order to assess and approve the targets, Science-Based Target Initiative need to understand the company's business activities and associated emission generating activities. Emission calculation numbers alone are not sufficient. So Science-Based Target Initiative also need adequate justification if a category is not relevant to your company. Because, it can be at times difficult to acquire primary scope 3 data on real activities, Science-Based Target Initiative allows company to develop targets based on secondary data. However, for both primary or secondary data that the company use, the companies need to provide a detailed justification of the emission estimates and why secondary data basically reflects the company's real world emissions. In order to allow for the data constraints within the inventory, companies are allowed to exclude more than 5% of their GHG emissions from their scope 1 and scope 2 submissions, and no more than 10% of scope 3 emissions. So it is important for companies to understand the difference between the inventory exclusion and, should not confuse it with the target exclusion. Growth projections, it's always advisable that it should reflect the actual emissions that is being produced. And if these are not accurate, companies may find achieving this target easier or more difficult than anticipated. Lastly, many companies assume that category 15 scope 3, which basically talks about the investments, are not relevant to them because they are not financial institutions, which is not true. In most of the cases, companies that choose an operational or financial control consolidation approach while developing their boundaries to calculate their GHG inventory should account for the emissions from any asset the company wholly or partially owns but does not control in this category. Okay, last few slides from my end. Once this target has been approved by the Science-Based Target Initiative, they will publish these targets on its website and relevant partners' website, like I mentioned in a few slides earlier. Science-Based Target Initiative publishes this target 1 month after the approval unless otherwise instructed by the companies. The target must be made public within 6 months of approval, or it will require a revalidation to ensure that the targets are in line with the latest, latent science-based target criteria. And these are very dynamic guidelines which keep changing over a period of time. Science-Based Target Initiative will also send a welcome pack with an advice on how to communicate the new targets. And last part is obviously the disclosure of the progress. So following the approval, companies should actually disclose their GHG emissions annually and monitor the progress on reaching the targets. Recommendations for reporting may include, but not necessarily, just limited to disclosure through the CDP platform or through annual report or through sustainability report, or it could also be through company's own website. With this, I'll just end my presentation here. Thank you so much for your patient listening. And it's my privilege to now invite Mr. Prabodha Acharya, Group Chief Sustainability Officer, JSW Group, to provide his initial remarks. And specifically, we'd like to hear from you on why it makes sense for the JSW Group to consider and implement bold climate actions aligned with the science. Sir, the floor is yours now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Subrat. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to interact today. And good afternoon to all the audience. So after listening to you, Subrat, and looking at this is for construction sector, I thought it's prudent to remind all the listeners that from JSW, we provide key materials that is used in construction sector. One of the important element that goes to construction sector is steel. Next is cement. We are also producing cement. We need energy, and that also we produce through our JSW Energy. And we need paints. So we have a paints company also. So in essence, many of the input what Sunita needs, she sources from JSW Group. And that is where she starts putting pressure on me that how I can give products having less carbon footprint that can help Mahindra to build sustainable buildings across India. And there it comes on one important aspect that if we have to produce materials with lesser carbon footprints or embedded carbon footprints, how we should proceed with our ambitions supported with actions. Just to limit the discussions today, let me touch on one of the important material, that is steel. So I'll not try to cover all the materials, but let me try to cover steel. And from the JSW Steel perspective, that is a material business for us. That's the largest business for us. And of late, steel is also being discussed because of its potential of having larger contributions to the emissions. Let me share a couple of slides to illustrate my points, if I have rights to present. Okay. I hope, is my slides visible?
Yes, yes, we can see your slides.
Yeah, you can see, but somewhere it I couldn't see. I don't know what happened. Just give me a minute. I'm not very
Sure.
good at technologies. I don't know what happened. I'm unable to see my own slides. So I don't know where I am. So let me again share. Maybe I should have shared that in advance with you.
You can still email, sir.
All right. I think I know where I am doing mistakes. All right. All right. Okay. Get slide. Sorry for this. Subrat is talking about science-based target. So what is that science? Just in layman language, I just wanted to explain that we all know there is a carbon budget. If we want to remain at 1.5 degrees centigrade, we have a limited amount of carbon to be emitted, otherwise we'll not be able to do. And that's around, globally, what IPCC tells, around 500 gigaton. And if you take out the deforestations, I think it is coming for the total energy sector around 450. And recently they have allocated those budgets to different, there is something called MPP sectors. This is called Mission Possible Partnership sectors, which you see towards the right side, where aluminum, cement, chemical, steel, aviation, shipping, and trucking, they usually refer to as difficult to decarbonization, and that's where World Economic Forum, along with Women Business Coalition, has come up this as known as MPP, that Mission Possible Partnership sectors. And there they have allocated around 56 gigaton of emission budget to steel. When we talk about science-based target, what was happening earlier till date, they had given all the budget to all kind of steel making, irrespective of how you make the steel. Normally, steel is made in two ways. Either you melt the scrap to make the steel, or you take iron ore, reduce it to iron, and make the steel. So the latter part, when you make the steel by from a primary ore, the emissions are quite higher, and that was brought to the notice of science-based target by our global steel industries. So we talked to science-based target. We told this is not a fair way to allocate budget. So now this is what our total budget, and what they're doing. I think Subrat explained about the carbon convergence methodology, which I will not detail out. But iron and steel sector follows that SDA methodology. And you see the left side, that is how, right side, that is how they have arrived. That they have now bifurcated the budget into both the routes. The first route they call ore-based budget, which approximately 48 gigaton they have used. And the scrap-based budget is given around 7 gigaton. Why it is coming more given to ore-based? Because more emission comes when you make iron and then produce the steel. So this is what they have proposed. But for the purpose of audience, I wanted to say that this is proposed. This is not yet finalized. It is being the consultation is going on, and science-based target is institute is hoping that this will be finalized by end of this year. We have some observation as steel producer from the world. So this is undergoing change. But if you look at these targets are becoming very stringent towards the end, towards the 2050. And please note, this is no growth scenario. So in Indian case, it is going to be much difficult because our growth is going to double. So this is one aspect how the science-based target are looking at the budgets. Now, what is happening in the steel sector? As I told, steel is made in two ways. The share of primary route is 3/4 of total steel making ways. But if you look at the left side down below the graph, I've given last 10 years how the steel sector globally is the carbon intensity is going. If you look at this graph is going upward, that means the sectoral emission is coming higher. So that doesn't mean only the steel sector is having higher emissions. This is the fact which we are observing globally. And every year the emission is increasing. Actually, it should decrease. So that brings a question, are we doing what we are saying? And why I'm telling, are we doing what we are saying? Because everybody is pushing their interventions and expectations that things will happen towards the end when technological development happens. So in a essence, we being the old generation, we are pushing our responsibility to the next generation, which is not the right way. Now, to drive my point, I also have given this chart to you, where 35% of global steel production has already, given some kind of net zero commitment. This is happening. Are we moving in the right direction? You saw the graph. Now, keeping all this in the mind, what is the option available to us? So in JSW, we took a pragmatic approach. That means we must reduce our emissions. We must take actions. Then what are the options available? That is where I want to show how we are going ahead and how we believe that we are contributing to the decarbonization journey. Now, what we decided, because we do not have a global agreement at the moment to follow a science-based target for the steel sector, we thought to follow the SDS scenario given by IEA. What this SDS or Sustainable Development Scenario in other way is a scenario in which the steel sector could achieve a pathway or could follow a pathway which is approximately around 1.67 degree world scenario, not 1.5 degree. It is Paris compliant because Paris Agreement states that we must all, work towards reducing below 2 degree. So therefore, we believe this is Paris compliant. And this is aligned with with what is called NDC, National Determined Contributions, where our emissions has to be reduced at least 60% by 2050. So that's where we are targeting. But most important thing, we are not focusing on the long-term targets. We are focusing on the short-term 2030 target. And that is where we have given a commitment to reduce the emissions by 42%. When I mean emission, it is emission intensity, because absolute emission in Indian steel industry is going to grow. So please keep that in mind, because our steel consumption is one of the lowest in the world. We are consuming around 76 kg per capita, where world average consumption is around 225. So therefore, we will add capacities in our country to meet our economy need, to progress the economy progress, to ensure that India become the center to support the energy transitions where you need a lot of steel. We need a lot of infrastructure growth, so there we need a lot of steel. So where we acknowledge the fact that for the building sector, for the infrastructure sector to grow in India, we need to grow economy, we need to increase the consumption of steel, but we cannot increase the emissions the way we used to do. And that is where we have aligned that we need to reduce our emissions. What are the options available? We are stuck with our current technologies. Now, question is that, are we selecting the best available technology available to us? Are we going to produce or use the available resources to the maximum extent and support through energy transitions as much as possible? JSW, we are targeting to phase out thermal coal by 2030, which is itself is a very ambitious target. And that is where we believe that we can support in the decarbonization of Indian journey. Just to quickly give other sectors, this is one. So in a sense, if I summarize, in steel sector, we are trying to follow sustainable development scenario. Interim, we want to reduce 42% of our emissions from 2005 level. By 2050, we want to reduce 60% of emissions from 2020 level. Our aspirations to achieve a near zero emissions well before 2070. If I come to the energy sector, because we have JSW Energy, where we have committed to science-based target of 1.5 degree pathway to achieve a net zero situation by 2050, that is why we have done, because energy transition is a visible technological option which is financially viable. So we know it is surely for happening, which we don't have that visibility in steel sector. So that is what we are working. It is under validations. But to my surprise, the validation, everything is done with SBTi. I don't know if anybody is from SBTi listening to it. I have taken up with their all the stakeholder. We have a small asset, coal asset in South Africa, which we are not operating. And we were in the process of liquidating it, getting out of it. And that becomes a point where SBTi is not validating my target or completing the validation, rest all is done. So the message what I want to give it to the audience, that if you are dealing with thermal coal anywhere, SBTi will take it very seriously before validating. So please be aware about it and deal with it. So a clear signal is coming to get out of fossil fuel, and specifically from thermal coal. The third sector, I must also touch upon the cement sector. The cement sector, we have an advantage in the sense, when we build this business, we build in a focus of circularity and reducing our emissions in the design stage itself. What we are doing, we are using the waste coming out of the steel sector, something called slag, and that goes for cement making, where the production and use of clinker is minimized. That is the reason why JSW cement's carbon footprint is much lower. But because our baseline is much lower, following the cement SDA to arrive at a science-based target is becoming more stringent, because my curve is becoming steeper. But we are working out, we are committed to further reduce that and remain the lowest emitting cement always in the world. I'll be happy to take any questions anytime, but thank you very much again, Subrat, for giving this opportunity. Sunita, it is always lovely to see you and support symbiotically wherever we can. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabodha. I'll probably pass it on. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions, but let me just pass it on to Faiza to take this session forward. We'll come back on questions. So, Faiza.
Sure. Thank you, Subrata. So I'll again like to thank Mr. Prabodha for the very engaging and insightful conversation, and especially presenting to us the most potential lying behind the most important materials like the steel and the cement sector, which are most important for our construction. And I think I should really admit, and the audience will also agree to me, that it was really fascinating to see how two major companies, one from the manufacturing and one from the developer side, are really pushing each other to move towards their sustainable businesses. So thanks again, Mr. Prabodha and Dr. Sunita. And I think we couldn't agree more that, since as you mentioned that, things will happen when technological developments, move on and happen at a rapid pace. And as you said, this is the right time for commitment. I think, as you mentioned, short-term realistic goals are the need for the hour instead of long-term goals and targets. And I think we all will definitely benefit from the lessons learned from you on how you have been able to accomplish from the SDGs scenarios, the pragmatic approaches, and how it has really helped JSW reduce its emissions intensity. Your enthusiasm has really been contagious, and we hope many more material manufacturing companies are inspired by your journey to set SBTs in the near term. Thank you again. And now that we've heard from the most eminent material manufacturing group in India, I think we are all now waiting to hear from the developer's perspective. So without further ado, may I kindly request Dr. Sunita to enlighten us all with her experience at MLDL. Over to you, Dr. Sunita.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Few comments before I start. This is about our journey. This is a lot of disclosure, and a few of you who know me, have met me, know that I'm a all disclosure kind of a person, so that other people can learn. And that's what the charter is all about. I thank Prabodha for such insightful, technical, slides, but you made it sound very easy. It is not easy because putting it out, making business stakeholders understand and making stakeholders in the decarbonization charter understand, that's quite a task. And making science understood by people in the business is also a huge task. So I learned a lot from you. I'll take the video off, and sorry, I'm in a little noisy environment, and my apologies for that. I do see a lot of young people. Anybody who is younger than me is a young person. So the point I make is we don't have time. And we don't have time means that you have to pull more people in the sector into the charter. These are all free learning sessions, but with time, we will see how we can make it restricted to the members who, become part of this decarbonization journey that we have set out to be. This is Learning Series 2. Wanted to share about Mahindra Life Spaces journey. Next slide, please. Yeah, you'll have to help me. Yeah, so these are some of our commitments. The one on the left talks about what we felt, we could contribute to the sector. These are our specific ESG commitments. The one on the right are also our commitments, but it's aligned to the larger group's vision. Anand Mahindra had already committed to, science-based target at Davos, and he had said it would be for all group companies. All companies will become carbon neutral by 2040. It is an operational target with a choice for scope 3 emissions. And therefore, you see on the left, we have actually taken a very ambitious target. All developments will be net zero energy, waste, water, and that's a very, very ambitious. Believe me, it's not an easy journey. I've been pushed by the CEO to even look at carbon and therefore the materials and therefore the conversation with steel, which Prabodha was alluding to. Carbon cannot be seen alone, right? And therefore you will see it is water and energy, they have a nexus, waste and energy, they have a nexus. We really need to take care of the full environment, and therefore the socio-environmental targets are commitments are what you're seeing out here. Next slide. Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to show you the wordings. It is about it is an absolute target reduction of scope 1 and scope 2. That is for scope 1 and scope 2, 63% and a 20% reduction for scope 3. And I'll talk in detail about the scope 3 and want everybody to understand the nuances, because people do not understand the nuances. And in business, these are the nuances that are very difficult to explain. Am I audible, Faiza? The screen is gone.
Yes, Dr. Sunita, you are audible, but we're still presenting the screen.
Yeah, okay, fine. Next slide, please. While we have under the science-based commitment, 20% reduction, like I said earlier, it is about, on our products, it is net zero energy, net zero waste, net zero water. This is what we had in a base year, that is 2018-19. And I'll show you how we have got to this number. Primarily, it is the fuel consumed by diesel DGs and the electricity consumption by offices and sales galleries. That is our main operational model. We do not construct, we do not have our own construction firm. So that is through contractors, and therefore that is part of our scope 3. Next slide. Yeah. So you will see SP doesn't stand for Sunita Purushottam, no, and UC is uncategorized. So if you see the numbers before we did the science-based target, it is about, the numbers were very high, and I'll tell you why they were very high and why when we did the inventory, the complete inventory, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, we were able to identify why, what needs to be taken where. So the right categorization. The point I'm trying to make is that you really need to understand what is the scope and boundary of scope and scope 3. So your GHG inventory has something called a scope and boundary. Scope would mean what are the gases you're going to consider, and the boundary would mean, what are the projects, what are the offices, what are the subcomponents of your physical entities that are actually sources of GHG emissions. So the SP is after the science-based targets, we were able to recategorize it and set that baseline. Next slide. Yeah. So what was happening was before the science-based target, which you see the bracket in middle, it is the total fuel consumption, total diesel consumption, total electricity consumption is what we were taking. We had actually not done any submetering on or a structured approach to data collection. It was one income line for construction, and that's what was getting distributed. So bringing that discipline meant going back to the project site, ensuring that we are no longer saying, itna hua hoga, and therefore itna katenge hum paisa, and no assumption based calculation, but totally metering. So getting that change took about a year after setting the science-based target that I'm not going to accept data that you're going to give me on the basis of, this could possibly be our construction energy consumption. No. So that's where we put our foot down. Even now, because there is a lot of flux during the construction activities and the offices keep changing, sales offices come up, and then, but we are integrated into all parts of the business process, right? From launches to what is going to get demolished to what is going to, stop working. So what kind of office reconstitution is going to happen? We are totally plugged in. We need to get plugged in even more so that we can, there is no leakage in our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. The other thing is that before SBT, we were looking at, okay, business travel, thought about employee commute, thought about paper consumption and materials and so on. But getting a structure, putting it into these categories and knowing what is pertinent for the business is important. You have to look at each category and then say, so purchase goods and services, I'll go into a little bit detail over there. Upstream transportation is what is coming in and going out of the sites. What is the travel data collection around that? Waste generated in operations, the business travel, employee commute, leased assets, if any, downstream leased assets, and use of sold products. And when I'll show you the inventory, you'll understand the major bifurcation and why our net zero target on the product makes a lot of sense. There were a lot of a lot of incomplete data, inconsistent calculation methodology, inability of the corporate team to actually make the stakeholders sit down and say, okay, this is the methodology in which we are going to do the computation, and this is the data you're going to give me. The trackability of the data at the back end, bifurcation, data monitoring and calculation, and that actually applies to all scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So these needed to be corrected. We actually put down a documentation which is aligned to GRI, where we said, okay, we'll collect data in this way. Okay, and then those trainings need to happen continuously. It is a journey, but it will help everybody understand that electricity is not here to be wasted. Fuel is not here to be wasted. It brings in a lot of sensitization and a lot of respect for what. So because we have kept a gate in, gate out system, people know we are tracking it, we are monitoring it. Okay, and that brings a lot of awareness in the right sense that this is undergoing scrutiny. And when things are scrutinized, people become a little bit vigilant that, HO in head office, they are tracking this. Next, and there's a system we are using, Sophie, at this point in time for tracking. Let's look at scope 3, and that's, I love to do a scope 3 inventory because it helps you get a good understanding of the business. And while it is easy to say, that they're not, I'm not responsible for it, but actually I'm influencing it. And therefore it is your moral responsibility to take care of it. And if you see our scope 1 and scope 2, those numbers, and these are all base year numbers. The numbers that came out in the base year, and of course, like Shubhra mentioned, estimations are allowed. We used a lot of estimation for use of sold products, and I hope with time we'll be able to measure it and be able to validate these numbers. Business travel, those are validated completely through the travel data. Employee commute is through surveys. Purchase goods is through what comes in, what and the services, of course, is the contractor related data, which is completely measured. So it's a combination of assumptions and a combination of actual data measurement happening. So use of sold product is the main thing, and therefore, like I said, our net zero commitment helps us to actually reduce more than 20% as per the SBTi, and if we by 2030, and that's the plan, that every product that we launch, every building that we launch is going to be a net zero energy, bare minimum, net zero energy, it has to happen. So that's what we are looking at. And but the purchase goods and services numbers will increase. That is the steel, the concrete, and the contractor work. How do we offset that and look at the embodied carbon? So the material, we are working on a material optimization strategy. And net zero waste, the other commitment, looks at construction phase waste as well as use phase waste. So we are tackling it in that manner. So see the interconnectedness, and therefore carbon, everybody's understanding is carbon is only energy. No, it is not. Carbon is much more. It is interlinked, it is linked, and it's hidden with your water consumption data also. Next slide. Yeah, so this is a little bit more detail. There are challenges around getting to the right embodied carbon and getting to India specific databases, working with, Terry, working with other individuals who can help us get the right, and as well as the suppliers to give us the right emission factors to do a robust calculation on our embodied carbon. This is currently for 3-4 major materials. We would like to extend it, and that is what we plan to do, that get more embodied carbon data into our normal working of projects, because that will then go into the material optimization strategy. Upstream transportation has been established practice, upstream transportation and distribution. Mainly what's coming in, what's going out, what distance it has come from, all these are logged. What distance it's going to, where it is going to is logged. Waste generated is, of course, in terms of the construction waste management, and the business travel, of course, it's a fairly centralized system. Employee commute is, again, it's a survey response. It's a one in time, and the challenge is, how do you get the true picture? Also, there is other challenge, because then the employees actually expect, what are you going to do about it? So that is also challenging, because many employees join us because we are a forward-thinking company, but they also want answers around, could we buy a EV? Could the company help us? And there are some changes that have happened in employee car procurement policies, where we are looking at EVs and so on. But a comprehensive employee commute plan is what we have not yet worked on. And the other is around the use of sold goods. 92% contributes. After handover, tracking the actual electricity fuel consumptions is a challenge. There is some innovative work that we are going to do that could help us monitor the customer electricity consumption post handover, and that's a requirement of the net zero energy building, actually. So we have developed India's first residential net zero building. And next. Yeah. So these are some of the indicated projects, looking at whether leadership transport can happen through EV fleets wherever possible, and so on and so forth. So this is a list. I've spoken through some, and we will have to continue to fine tune it as we try and see what is the major, projects that we really focus on. The last bucket on at the bottom is where we are completely focused, which is the net zero energy, net zero waste products, that is homes. It is also the business model, right? That what kind of differentiated products we are selling out. Aligns to life, lifestyle for environment, that if you want everybody to convert to a lifestyle environment, does your home allow you to be, to have low energy, thermally comfortable, well ventilated, low energy consumption homes, low waste generating homes. So it has to be designed like that. So that's the entire focus. The next focus would be actually the material optimization strategy. So in that order. Rest all are de minimis. We can continue to work on them. And that's the whole idea. Next slide. I just prioritize. So this is the broad strategy. It's just, I'll leaf through it. Our offices and sales gallery in the business as usual path next are on the higher, and if we do not take the right approach. So the whole intention was, can we make it super efficient? And then we do the renewable energy integration. So super efficient is through design. And then we have laid out guidelines for targets for our offices also. And next slide. Yeah, next. Yeah, so that's the kind of, so it's demand reduction, behavioral, and renewable energy integration. And this is the kind of roadmap we are looking at. Easier said than done. Believe me, it is easier said than done, even if you have to offset a little bit of carbon emissions, because business is on the go. So there is a huge demand. There are huge business targets to be fulfilled. The way we are selling has changed. So we are looking at how we can work with the business to make this happen in terms of the science-based targets. So I'll stop here and hand it back to Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sunita, for sharing with us your daily challenges in helping MLDL achieve its SBTs and carbon neutrality targets. I think it was really interesting to see how, you put up this graph where you see the company's energy consumptions before and after setting the SBTs. I would like to appreciate the fact of how forthright you've been to put down the errors and the gaps that have been bridged along the time. And I think this might also have been the case for few companies who have been struggling to do so. And these errors might also be occurring, like, the fact for many of the companies in the market. As you rightly mentioned, I think it's important to look at the structure and get into the details of what it is pertinent to the operations. And this is where the key lies to decarbonize. I'll also like to highlight the fact that you mentioned on how important it is to coordinate with your material suppliers, your travel operators, and so on, which again is a chain. And yeah, this is what we are trying to do with our, partners and our signatories through our charter, right? To help decarbonize the building and construction businesses across the value chain by working with our signatories. So I hope many, developers are inspired by the journey that MLDL has set. And also thank you very much for sharing your experience here again. So quickly, I think, we can take a few questions from the chat box. I would request the speakers to kindly, attend to few of the questions that have been put out while I read it out for them. So the first question, I think what I can see here is maybe for Mr. Prabodha, on what are the efforts taken by JSW on scope 3 emissions across the value chain, covering all the 15 category emissions. I think this is a follow-up question on what were the challenges and how they have been overruled. So, Mr. Prabodha, would you like to take this up?
Oh, yeah, of course. Thank you. Thank you for that question. First of all, let me say, where as a organizations, as a country, where we need to focus. We need to focus. Everybody need to focus to reduce their own emissions, right? And I'm not a great believer of scope 3. or scope 2 or scoping of the emissions. I'm a believer that everybody has to reduce their emissions, and everybody should influence others to reduce their emissions. And that is where your scope 3 can be a measure, but categorizing, tracking, and reducing, it doesn't make any sense. Let me tell you why I'm telling you it doesn't make any sense. What we do in scope 3, we do a very high level of estimation of these emissions. I don't think anybody is able to monitor the scope 3 emissions. And if anybody is doing, please let me know. I want to learn. Therefore, even if we look at in our supply chain, in the both upstream and downstream, we need to reduce our emissions, influence the supply chain to reduce their emissions. As an organization, we need to focus on those which are material for us, which is important. Not too exhaustive. I look at everything and try to reduce everything. We should be pragmatic and look at what are the big buckets. Now, when we have analyzed ourselves, first of all, we have analyzed that our own emissions is becoming a problem for all our supply chain emissions. So we become scope 3 for many. So that is the reason we are focusing our own emission reduction. Then in the supply chain, the material related emissions that we are using the material, purchasing the materials, and the transport associated with those materials are the big issues, and we need to address that. So for that, what we are doing, we are tying up and working with our big suppliers. For example, coking coal, iron ore is a big material for us, and BHP is one of the big suppliers. So we are making joint tie-ups. We are working together. We have signed MOU that let us address those issues where we can work together. Not, I'm telling you as a supplier, you reduce your emissions. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Similarly, on the transportation, we are trying to change the logistics and use, electrify the movement as much as possible. Employee travel, all those, they're very marginal. Is it worth focusing when I really do not know what exactly the emission? How do I reduce the employee related travel? I reduce the number of travel because there is no alternative for the sustainable aviation fuel in the aviation sector. So I think instead of getting more focused on all those items in scope 3 and looking at that, this will be a pen and paper exercise where I'm not a great believer. So that is what my view is that there should not be any scope. There should be only one, your emissions to be reduced. If that would have been case, why the NDC is not including the emissions associated with the products being imported to a country? We are focusing on country's own emissions, right? So that's a completely different viewpoint I want to give you. Challenges is, I think one of the questions related to challenges. Challenges is how you work with your supply chain. I think that address.
Yeah, I think that addressed most of the questions that were there in the chat box.
But it's a completely different viewpoint. I know many people may not agree, but I'm happy to debate with them. Because my analysis tells solely we all tell that we are reducing our scope 3, but actual emission is increasing. Why the actual emission is increasing? Everybody is reducing. If everybody is reducing, so we need to change our approach.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for answering that question, Mr. Prabodh. I think there are 2 more questions for you, but before that, I'll take up one question for, Dr. Sunita. So, we have a question on, what are the steps that MLDL is planning for reducing the use of sold products, like imagining LEED or GRIHA certified buildings? And can you elaborate on what net zero means to offices and how does that reduce emissions? And how we can actually achieve that?
Thank you. Basically, all our products are green buildings. They are certified. Whether it is a city or whether it is a residential building that we make or an industrial cluster, it will undergo a green building, green SEZ, green township certifications. The portfolio it's actually a green product. And now in what senses are they green? So there are five areas, 6 areas actually. It's materials, it is energy, it's water, it's waste, it is indoor air quality, and site selection. So these are the various aspects that these certification bodies look at. In addition, in Bangalore, what we did as India's first net zero energy residential building, we have actually gone in for one more certification, and that's what I was alluding to earlier, that by 2030, all our buildings will be net zero energy, net zero waste, and net zero water. That water is the most challenging one. So the entire energy calculation, energy balance, so whatever we will be using, we actually have reduced it through a process which is called as climate responsive design. So getting that
Dr. Sunita, are you speaking? We lost you, I think, just for a couple of seconds.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we lost her.
Yeah, I think we can wait for a minute for Dr. Sunita to join. If not, maybe we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, sorry, Faiza,
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
dropped off.
Yeah,
I had dropped off.
Yeah, please continue,
yeah.
Dr. Sunita.
So that's the net zero energy related certification. This is endorsed by IGBC, where the total energy that this building will consume will be completely renewable. So that's the equation over there. What does it entail? It means that it is on demand reduction, and that's key because you cannot, there is a limitation around the renewable energy production also, how much you can take from the grid, how much you can generate on site. On-site generation is 5%, and the grid energy that we are taking is 95%. But this is after we have worked on the design, and that's the critical point, because climate responsive design is the only way that offices and our sales galleries and our products that we are making, which is the buildings, can actually reduce the energy demand and maintain a thermal comfort that people comfortable enough don't need artificial cooling. So that's been our core focus area, to work with the design, to show them how the building needs to be oriented, what kind of shading needs to come in, what kind of vertical, horizontal shading, the size of the windows. So it's been an extremely uphill journey around working with our design team, business team, where the perception in the Indian market has completely changed to chhajjaless buildings. Even in Bangalore, if you see, I find absence of chhajjas. In Bombay, I find absence of chhajjas, which is, it's a huge shock, because at least you should protect your homes from rain, if not the sun. So changing the thought process around how you should design actually solves even up to 45% of your energy requirement. And if you visit, India is a hot country. It's got variety of climates, of course, but it's quite hot. And therefore, how do you keep the sun out? And that's what the traditional architecture has been all about. So that's been the critical part. And of course, site selection helps you on, see site allocation where, you can have carbon sinks, have a close proximity to amenities, have close proximity to public transport, could be designed for walkability. So a lot of emphasis is around actually designing for low carbon living. And the waste management in the use phase, waste management during constructions, it's been a journey, because there are various aspects, and you can't take everything to the stakeholders and do it in a day. So we've been taking pieces out and saying, okay, let's do this. Let's do it in this project in this way. And that's how we've been able to push it. And believe me, before I did Eden, that is the first net zero building, I had done 10 projects and had taken it to 10 business stakeholders inside, uh, making them see how much energy we are wasting and at what cost. And I continue to do that for our offices. And the question around offices is designing the offices is important. Kitting them out early on is important. That can I make more efficient buildings? And that's been the crux of this journey. And I don't know whether it answers your question, Matsy, but happy to chat with you later.
Thanks, Dr. Sunita, for taking this up so easily. So, I think it was really great for you to answer the questions. And we thank all the participants who have been really engaging by putting their questions in the chat box. I think we are a little bit mindful of time here. So maybe for all the questions that are in the chat box, we can either write to each of them offline or via emails. And yeah, I think by now we come to the close of today's session. Once again, on behalf of all the partners, I would like to thank the speakers for sharing their valuable thoughts and taking us through such an important subject. I would also like to thank the attendees for sparing their valuable time with us and tuning into this very interesting session. We will also be hosting our next session in this series in March, and we'll share further details with you all very soon. In case if any of you are interested to learn more about the charter and be part of it, please do reach out to one of us. Thank you again, and looking forward to connecting, learning, and working with all of you in the near future. Hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you.